Wall Street comes under pressure as bond yields spike on stronger than expected September retail sales data. Stocks in the Asia Pacific open lower ahead of the release of China's third quarter GDP, while the GIFT Nifty is also signaling a negative start for the Indian market. Crude moves higher. Brent rallies past the $91 a barrel mark ahead of U.S. President Joe Biden's visit to conflict-riddled West Asia. Gold too surges as the Israel-Hamas conflict sparks safe haven buying. The windfall tax on crude is cut to 9,000 rupees a ton from 12,100 rupees earlier. The duty on diesel is cut to 4 rupees a litre from 5 rupees earlier, while the tax on aviation fuel is reduced to 1 rupee a litre from the earlier 2.5. Bajaj Finance's second quarter numbers are in line with estimates. Net interest margin also holds up well. In key earnings to track today, Bajaj Auto, IndusInd Bank and Wipro will all be releasing the second quarter numbers. And hundreds die as a massive explosion hits a hospital in Gaza ahead of U.S. President Joe Biden's visit to Israel. Protests erupt across cities in West Asia as the Hamas blames the Israeli airstrike for the explosion, while the Israelis say the explosion was caused by a misfiring Hamas rocket. A summit between the U.S. president and Egyptian and Palestinian leaders also stands cancelled. Hey guys, good morning and welcome to Power Breakfast. I'm Pavitra Parekh. Those are the top headlines that we're tracking for you as we get into a brand new Wednesday. So there's lots going on that we need to look at across the world, in terms of tensions in West Asia really escalating. We're also seeing sharp moves in the U.S. money market, which is definitely having its bearing on what we're seeing across the equities as well. So let's kickstart the show by taking a look at the Asian markets, which, by the way, all of them are in the red right now. It's not too much of a cut, but, you are seeing some of them have slipped further in the past few minutes. So you have Taiwan, which is perhaps the worst this morning. It's 0.7% lower. Seng also seeing similar cuts right now. Both of these indices have actually slipped a little bit more in just the past 5 minutes or so. Now, in terms of the data that we're looking at, which is key to track from the Asian markets, is the Chinese GDP. Ahead of that, you have the Shanghai, which is seeing a cut of around 0.5% right now. The Nikkei market's also seeing a little bit of red, but just around 20 points lower there. So we're getting, cuts across the Asian markets. It's not too bad for now, but the markets on your screen, the Hang Seng and Taiwan, are leading the losses this morning. Let's also bring the GIFT Nifty up so you can see that the start for our own markets is also likely to be a little bit lower. That is looking like around 16, 17 points lower on the GIFT Nifty is where we're at right now. Remember, yesterday we closed quite well. It was an 80-point gain that we saw even at the end of the trading session. But today it looks like we might see a little bit of a pullback when things really kickstart. So let's see how we move from there. But let's talk about the U.S. market as well, because Wall Street ended Tuesday's session a little bit lower. The S&P 500 and Dow Jones closed quite flat, just a little bit of red seen over there, while the Nasdaq lost around 34 points. Now, investors are reacting to, like I mentioned, the sharp moves that we're seeing in the U.S. bond market, as well as a lot of third quarter earnings that came through specifically from the financials. So in terms of the money market move, like you can see on your screen, the 10-year Treasury yield topped 4.8%. It was actually at 4.83%, and this is the highest level that we've seen all through October. So that's definitely important to track. And the earnings that I was mentioning, this is Q3 earnings for the U.S., by the way, and a lot of financials. So you had Bank of America, it topped estimates for the third quarter. And you also had Goldman Sachs, which posted its results, and that was ahead of what the street was really expecting. But on the profit front, there seems to have been a bit of a hit. So that is on Goldman Sachs, some of the big results that we're really tracking from the U.S. We also got some important, data which came out of those markets. So retail sales, this is for the month of September, saw a rise of around 0.7%. And this is actually a little bit stronger than what the street had factored in. So that is everything that we're looking at as far as the U.S. market goes. But let's listen in to Wharton School's Jeremy Siegel talk about that continued spike that we're seeing in U.S. bond yields and all of the inflation trends, of course.
Bonds have been harmed by proving to be a very bad hedge against inflation. I mean, bonds are great hedges against geopolitical risk, against financial crises, but they're very bad against inflation. We didn't have inflation for 40 years, so everyone sort of forgot about that bond, bad inflation outcome. And then suddenly, after the pandemic, it reared its head. And when we look forward the next 10, 15, 20 years, people are saying, you know what? There may be more inflationary episodes.
All right, that's the word coming in from Jeremy Siegel on the spike that we're seeing in the U.S. bond markets. But let's also listen to what Ali McCartney of UBS Private Wealth makes of this latest economic data that came through the retail sales, as well as how the Fed's next move could really drive markets. Listen in.
You have this one narrative that's driven by, okay, rates are catching up to us, credit card debt's going. He pointed out that middle income houses are starting to show signs of weakening. Then you have that other narrative, which is, but the consumer still goes. We just saw great retail sales numbers. We're seeing actually in the rear window, we have the earnings recession, so we think that's behind us and we're moving forward. So it is very much a confusing time, and I think ultimately the question is the Fed going to continue to drive markets or are fundamentals? Because what we're seeing in fundamentals are still very strong, both on the corporate earnings perspective and on the individual households.
All right, that is some important opinion coming in on the U.S. markets, and that's everything that we're looking at globally today. But let's now talk about how all of these global cues really could impact our own markets, as well as the stocks that you should watch for in today's trading session. We have Ekta, Nigel, and Surbi all here with us to prep us up for this trading session. Guys, a very good morning to all of you. Ekta, coming to you first, we were going through the global setup, which looks a little bit tough, especially considering what's going on as far as the geopolitical conflict is concerned, as well as, of course, the handover. But take us through what we should track.
Thanks for that. Well, yes, the Sensex and the Nifty closed at 1-month highs. This was after a narrow range trade in yesterday's trading session. FII's net bought around 263 odd crores. DII's net bought around 112.5 crores. This morning, oil prices have spiked up to over 2-week highs, $91 per barrel. This is ahead of the US president visiting Israel today. And separately, we do know about the hospital attack that happened. So there is speculation that it could probably result in the possibility of a wider conflict as well. So that is something that we would probably watch quite closely. US markets muted close. This is they are in focus on account of data and earnings that you just spoke about. So US retail sales were up 0.7%, better than expectations. Earnings from Bank of America, Goldman Sachs overnight. Asia is largely lower at this point in time. So do watch out for the implied open for the gift Nifty as well. Now, in terms of earnings, that's the next big cue that we are tracking. So Bajaj Finance, Tata Elxsi, Syngene, Zenza, all of them will be reacting to numbers. We have a lot of numbers today as well. Bajaj Auto, IndusInd Bank, Wipro, Bandhan Bank, LTI Mindtree, Persistent Systems, Polycab, RPG Life. So a lot of these companies will be reporting numbers today, and that will be the next port of call in terms of a domestic cue for us. The Fed officials will be speaking in the next couple of days, so that will also be a global cue, as well as the president's visit to Israel.
All right, Ekta, thanks a lot for laying out all of those cues for us. Like Ekta was pointing out, a lot of earnings that we are expecting today, but a lot that have already come through and that the street will be reacting to as well. So Surbi is here to fill us in with that list. Surbi, Bajaj Finance, of course, first one there.
Yeah, Bajaj Finance tops my list. The earnings were slightly below the poll, but the net interest margin holds up well. The net interest income was up 30% on a year-on-year basis, and the gross NPA ratio came in at 0.91%. Next is ICICI Pru. Weak set of numbers over there. The value of new business was down 7%, and the value of new business margin, that came in at 28% versus 31% same time last year. LTTS, a good Q2 numbers were in line with estimates, but there was a margin beat. And the company has cut the FY24 guidance. The revenue was up nearly 4% and the margins were constant at 17%. Tata Elxsi, it was a steady quarter. The EBITDA was also steady, came in at 29%. Zenza Tech, the revenues were up 1%. The EBITDA margins came in at 18.6% and the PAT was up 11%. Syngene, the revenue growth momentum was intact at 18% on a year-on-year basis. Margins have improved to 28% versus 26% in the previous quarter, but the company has scaled down the FY24 guidance due to the slowing in the US-based biotech segment. And lastly, Hudco will be on our radar because government is going to sell up to 7% stake via an OFS. The offer price is at 79 rupees per share.
All right, Surbi, thanks a lot for running us through that list of stocks. By the way, also watch out for the crude impact because we've seen quite a rise there. Right now, crude prices are almost at $92 a barrel, so that's also important to track. Nigel joins us now with all of the cues from the futures and options space. Hi, Nigel.
Well, I've been listening into you all, Pavitra, and as you were mentioning, the global cues are in a bit of a tizzy, so that's one point of concern. But our markets have been doing pretty okay. Even in yesterday's trading session, we had some bad news in the final hour of trade, but that got bought into, and the Nifty ended higher. There wasn't any big open interest build up, though the Nifty Bank, there was some kind of short covering that we saw out there. The FI as well, that data perfectly tallies because there was some long addition and there was some covering of shorts. Now the short positioning on the index futures is down to around 71%. Two strikes were very active. The 19,800 put, that was very active in yesterday's trading session. The premium was around 60 rupees. At the start of trade, it was more than 70 rupees. And on the upside, the 19,850 call, that as well was fairly active. Now, keep in mind, the Nifty ended higher, but yet you didn't make any much money on that 19,850 call, telling you that there was writing at those levels. So the resistance level becomes yesterday's high. That's 19,850. On the downside, 19,700 because that's a technical factor, and 19,730 because of the options data. But today is the Nifty Bank expiry, and the Nifty Bank has been moving up, but it's unable to cross that 44,600 odd mark. And yesterday as well, there was a fair bit of writing at around the 44,500 call, and there are a lot of resistance levels being seen in that vicinity of around 44,550 to around 44,650. The recent low will be a support zone. For starters, I think we pull back a little bit, and let's see how we do from there. We're likely to see, I think, a little deeper gash going by this morning's news. So buy on dip, maybe that should continue. The broad range, though, is around 19,700 to 19,850. Back to you.
All right, Nigel, thanks a lot for taking us through all of those cues. With that, it is time for a short break on the show. But like we were mentioning, Bajaj Finance is going to be top of mind because they did report second quarter earnings, which are pretty much in line with estimates. We'll have Abhishek on the other side to really break down the numbers for us. Welcome back. You're still tuned into Power Breakfast. Now, Bajaj Finance is going to be the key stock for us to watch for in today's trading session. They did report second quarter earnings. Abhishek is here to really help us make sense of the numbers. Abhishek, looks pretty much in line.
Well, Pavitra, as you mentioned, it's an inline set of numbers that Bajaj Finance has reported. The NI at 7,197 crore. We were working with a number of 7,209 crore. PAT came in slightly below our poll on account of elevated provisions. Asset quality, amount-wise, gross NPA has increased by 12.65% quarter-on-quarter. Net NPA increase of 8.6% quarter-on-quarter. However, the ratios have remained stable, with gross NPA ratio inching up by just 4 basis points. Calculation shows, and this is the best part, that the net interest margin has not declined as much as the street feared. It's declined only by 22 basis points on a YY basis and about 3 basis points on a sequential basis. Street was factoring in 30 basis point decline YY and 20 basis point on a sequential basis. Return ratios, both ROA and ROE, has remained strong, and capital adequacy ratio has remained at 23.9% when compared to 24.6% despite the strong growth in the AUM. Now, the AUM growth was largely led by the commercial, SME and mortgage portfolio, all of which grew anywhere between 8% to 10.5%. Back to you.
Okay, Abhishek, thanks a lot for taking us through all of those numbers. By the way, Bajaj Finance, the stock has also been doing very well, right? I mean, in 1 month, it's up around 8%. If you take a look at a wider, maybe 6-month chart, it's up around 35%. So it'll be interesting to see how this one fares in trade today. We do need to take a short break, but stay tuned. On the other side, we're tracking all of the cues from the commodity markets as tensions really escalate in West Asia. We'll bring you the details when we come back. Welcome back. Let's talk about the commodity space now, because that is where a lot of the action is really concentrated. Manisha joins us with an update. Manisha, we have been talking about how tensions in West Asia seem to be escalating after news of that, hospital bombing. But take us through what that's meant for the entire commodity pack.
Oh, well, absolutely. You know, the fears of a wider conflict in Middle East definitely seem to be supporting the safe haven buying. Is the reason that you've seen the crude oil prices jump up by 2% overnight. It's trading at a 2-week highs right now. And the further surge in crude prices comes in on the back of China third quarter GDP coming in at 4.9%. The estimates were for 4.6%. And with this number, China economy has grown by 1.3% on a quarter-on-quarter basis. So that clearly has taken the crude oil prices above $92 a barrel in the Asian markets right now. This also has supported the metals as a sector. So when you look at copper, we've jumped up by nearly a percentage point after the Chinese data. So at this point in time, at this moment, the markets are reacting to the China's third quarter GDP numbers that have come in just 10 minutes ago. And that is what is the commodity markets are looking as reaction. The other thing to watch out is going to be the U.S. president visit to Israel today. Statements that would come in out from today will keep the markets quite jittery.
Okay, Manisha, thanks a lot for bringing us all of those details from the commodity markets. But let's now focus on the crisis that we're seeing in West Asia. Palestinian authorities say at least 500 people were killed in a hospital airstrike as Israeli forces continue to target the Gaza Strip. Remember, U.S. President Joe Biden will also be visiting Israel later today amid concerns over an escalation in the conflict. We have NBC's Ellison Barber to bring us up to speed.
Hundreds of civilians inside of Gaza died after a hospital in Gaza City exploded. According to Hamas and Gaza's health ministry, they say that hospital, Al-Ahli, was hit by Israeli airstrikes. Israel is denying that. They say that this was not them, that they have nothing to do with it. They instead are pointing the finger at a militant group inside of Gaza, Islamic Jihad, saying that one of their rockets misfired and struck this hotel. Islamic Jihad has now put out a statement rebutting that, saying that Israel is lying here. And part of their argument for that, they say, is because eyewitness accounts and videos of the explosions, in their words, show, quote, the weight of the explosive head, the angle of the bomb's fall, and the extent of the destruction it left behind indicates an aerial bombardment launched from a warplane, which is what Israel has been doing. Now, in a briefing tonight, a spokesperson for Israel's defense forces said they have video that they plan to continue releasing, as well as some sort of audio recordings of conversations their intelligence operations have gathered of Islamic Jihad having conversations about this, which Israel says will show that they were responsible for this, not Israel. We do not know right now. NBC News has not been able to independently verify exactly what happened here, other than that we know there was a massive explosion at this hospital. Possibly up to 500 people are dead. The majority of them are civilians. A doctor who is working at one of the hospitals in Gaza, now treating many of the victims of this hospital attack. They say that the majority of the victims they have seen, that's people who are injured and also those who have died, they are women and children. They say a lot of them were people that had gone to the hospital, Al-Ahli, to seek shelter because they thought it would be a safe place from Israel's aerial bombardments. We've heard a lot from the United States. We've heard from Egyptian officials about their plans here, but there are two key parties that also have to agree to some sort of ceasefire in order to get that aid in, and that would be Israel and Hamas, and they're not speaking right now. Egyptian officials have said they do need to repair parts of the Rafah border crossing because it was struck and damaged in Israeli airstrikes, and they say they need to do that. Last we heard, aid, humanitarian aid that has made its way to Egypt that is supposed to go into Gaza is in storage about 30 minutes away from the border. We do expect that to be a topic of conversation when President Biden arrives here in Israel to meet with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. He was supposed to also stop in Jordan to have a meeting there with the president of the Palestinian Authority, which governs the West Bank, as well as King Abdullah of Jordan and President al-Sisi of Egypt. That has now been called off or postponed, in the words of a State Department official who spoke to NBC News. They have postponed that leg of the trip because of what happened at the hospital in Gaza. But we do expect the conversation of humanitarian aid certainly to be discussed when President Biden meets with Prime Minister Netanyahu.
All right, extremely tragic developments there. We are going to continue to track this very closely, and all eyes now on that meeting between U.S. President Joe Biden as well as Benjamin Netanyahu. So we'll get you all of the details. We're going to wind down on that note. Stay tuned. Bazaar Morning Call is up in 2.